Good afternoon, prospective UCT students. My name is Zahir Baker. I'm the Senior Manager in the Student Financial Aid Office. And today I'll be taking you through the process of looking at what funding options are available at UCT to make it a bit easier. So UCT, in conjunction with NSFAS, offers a very comprehensive financial aid program. We use funding from NSFAS as well as donor funding, and we put this program together. We've got basically two programs. The first is for people who fall into the category of 0 to 350,000 parental income, and those people are funded by NSFAS. And then the second category is for people 351 Rand and 600,000, and that falls into this gap funding category. So all applications must be done via the NSFAS offices, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that later on. So how the process works is that NSFAS evaluates all applications against the eligibility criteria, and that is very simple. So one, it's for South African citizens or non-South African citizens with a permanent residency status. They've got a financial need where your gross family income must be less than 350,000 Rand per annum, and you will submit documentation to prove this. NSFAS will also then run checks with Home Affairs and SARS to verify income. And then it is only for your first undergraduate qualification. NSFAS doesn't fund postgrad qualifications, and then it must be a funded program. Now at UCT, all our undergrad programs are funded, so that makes it easy. The gap funding is basically a funding program that UCT started, and this was to assist parents whose income is above 350,000 but less than 600,000. Now, people in this category were normally, if they were to apply for funding, they would often be told that their income is a bit too high and they don't meet the criteria. Or if they were to go to the bank and try and get bank loans, they were told that they're not earning enough. So they were always stuck between this gap, and that's how the name came about, the gap funding. So the gap funding is not comprehensive funding, but it does provide significant assistance to parents in this category. There's funding which is based on a sliding scale with a tuition bursary, and then a student loan administered by UCT based on the accommodation type. And as we go further, I'll explain that a little bit more in detail. And then the third category of funding, in a sense, is what we have is the sibling rebate bursary, and those are for students that have siblings at UCT that don't qualify for NSFAS or GAP. There is a percentage bursary that they can qualify for. The applications are on our website, and I'll share those details with you a bit later on in this presentation. So like I said, the main thing to do is do your application nice and early. NSFAS applications generally open on the 1st of September. That's when they open every year, and they close on the 30th of November every year for the following year. Now these dates might change, but they've generally been roughly the same for the last few years. And the most important thing or information that I can give to students when they're doing the application is to submit all their documentation and do one application, do the application in one go. Often we have students who have submitted part of the application or partial application or part of the documentation and not the full, which means the application cannot be assessed in one go. Okay, and I'll go through that a little bit later on. So let's look at what is covered by funding, because that's one of the main things that people look at sometimes when they come to UCT and they're scared. I'm coming to UCT, how will I cover my costs? So if you are approved for NSFAS, it covers your full cost of study. NSFAS covers your tuition fees or your course fees, covers your accommodation, covers your meals, books, and local travel where applicable. Okay, so students find themselves in one of four situations. Basically, either they are living in a catering res, and for most prospective students, first years, you'll go into a catering res. We also have self-catering residents where students make their own food, and there we provide them with a meal allowance. And then obviously students who live at home, local students who live in Cape Town and close to UCT, and they travel in and out every day. And then for some students who don't get accommodation in the res, they apply to us for private accommodation, and then assistance is also provided. So that's financial aid or NSFAS. That's full funding. Then we've got the gap funding, and like I said, it's for people between 350,000 to 600,000 per annum. And we provide a bursary funding, which is either 50%, 60%, or 70% based on your category within those two brackets. You get a bursary of 50, 60, or 70% of your total course fees. And so your parents do have a contribution to make, but it's a much smaller contribution. And then in addition to that, there's also a student loan which is offered to students depending on where they're staying. And that is either 14,300 if they're a local student and 51,400 if they're living in an accommodation type. I just need to mention at the same time, if there's any questions that you have while I'm going through the presentation, just pop it in the chat and then we can answer that before you forget. Yeah. How do you know if you qualify for the funding? So as I've mentioned, the rules around funding and what the eligibility criteria is published on the NSFAS website. It will be a good idea to familiarize yourself now already to see what the requirements are and what documentation you need to provide so that you can get all your documents ready for when the application is open and you can do a full application. Okay, NSFAS will confirm your funding directly to you. So you apply to NSFAS, they will confirm the funding directly to the applicant. Okay, there is a My NSFAS portal on which you apply and you will get the outcome on that portal. Generally, NSFAS releases the eligibility after the NSC results are released, which will be probably early January. Okay. In terms of your gap funding, UCT, because it's a UCT run program, UCT will confirm your eligibility. So what happens is everybody, both financial aid and gap, you both apply to NSFAS. NSFAS will either approve your application or decline the application if your income is above the 350, and then we would issue you with a gap funding application for all the people who are between 350 and 600. And so once we've done that assessment, we will then provide you with feedback as to your eligibility. So now in terms of renewal criteria, and people worry about how am I going to fund my full program? So NSFAS and gap funding is for the duration of your degree plus 1 year. Now we know sometimes students struggle in their first year of varsity when they're trying to adjust and they go through that adjustment from high school to university. So yes, there might be where you fail 1 or 2 courses and you need to make up. And so therefore the funding is for the N plus 1 year. So if you're doing a 3-year degree, the funding is for 3 plus 1, which is for 4 years. But there is individual eligibility criteria every year that you have to meet. So one is that NSFAS can do a reassessment of your eligibility over time. So in your first year, let's say your parental income was 345,000 Rand, and by the 3rd year, it might be now more than 350. So NSFAS has the right to do another eligibility check at that point. And then there's also the academic criteria. There's a set of there's a criteria which you must meet every year. So you need to pass a certain number of courses in order to renew your funding for the following year. Okay. You must also be doing the same course. So what becomes a problem is when students do a first year in a BCom first year, and then the next year they switch over to the BCom they switch over to a different faculty, a BA in music, for example. What that does, it extends your number of years, and what the end result is that you may run out of funding because NSFAS will still look at the number of years of that qualification that you are in. And so it's important that when you choose your courses that you are sure that this is the course that you want to do, and bear in mind that if you were to change your program, that you're not guaranteed of holding your funding for the new program. Okay, NSFAS will do an assessment of that. What I've just gone through now is funding options where you apply for funding. So the NSFAS and the gap funding is something that you apply for. At UCT, we also then have your scholarships, and there's no application required for any of the faculty scholarships except for sports. The sports scholarship is obviously something that you have to apply for, we don't have all the information around which provincial or national teams you've represented. So there's an application form for that, and it's on the website. For all other faculty scholarships, there's no application. It is automatically offered to a student based on faculty specific criteria. So each faculty will look at your matric results and will then see if you meet certain criteria and offer you a scholarship. And scholarships vary in sizes. Some faculties give 20,000 Rand for a scholarship, some 40,000 Rand, and even engineering gives 60,000 Rand, right? Because they have different criteria in each of their faculties. So an entrance scholarship is only for 1 year. It's for your first year. It's what you get based on your matric results. Thereafter, at the end of your first year, you are then considered for a faculty scholarship based on the results of your first year. So you can, in essence, get an entrance scholarship in your first year, and thereafter in your second year get a faculty scholarship, and then in your third year get another faculty scholarship. But all of that is based purely on academic performance. Okay. Now, how do you know if you're going to get a scholarship? Scholarship offers are made in conjunction with academic offers. So when you get a letter saying, look, you've been accepted to a certain faculty, you may get a scholarship offer with that academic offer. And I have to note here that scholarships are not transferable from one faculty to the next because they have different criteria. So if you get a faculty scholarship for humanities and you also get accepted to medicine, doesn't mean you can take that scholarship with you. You might not get a scholarship in the medical faculty because the criteria is different. So just to be aware of that. And then all our information about scholarships is available on the UCT website, and I'll share the link with you a little later on. So you can just browse through them, and so that you can see what the criteria is and measure yourself against that criteria to see if you are in line to get a scholarship, if you get accepted. We also have the Vice Chancellor Scholarship, which is a very prestigious scholarship for 100,000 Rand, and those go to top achieving students in various categories. So the one category is if you finish in the top 10 in the English, Maths or Computer Science Olympiads, or if you're one of the top 10 writers in the Western Cape province, in the school in the Western Cape, or top 15 in the NSC in the country, or if you are in the top 5 in the IAB. So there's a nice prize up for grabs, 100,000 Rand scholarship. It's renewable for 3 years. Again, if you meet academic performance, which means you must be on the Dean's merit list in your faculty. And again, faculties have different criteria for being on that merit list. And then you have the chance to renew your scholarship. Again, full information is on the UCT website. So it's a good idea to look at the criteria now if you are doing any of those Olympiads, or if you're looking to get a top spot in the finals, so that you are aware of where you are at when it's time for the marks. One of the programs that UCT piloted, and it's now it's no longer pilot, it's running in full flight mode, is the laptop program for incoming or new students, especially with where we are at in the world today. Everything is online. We have the laptop program. It's not compulsory, and students have the option to opt in or not. So from a financial aid point of view, the NSFAS students have the option also to participate in this laptop program, and the cost of this laptop program is deducted over 2 years. So NSFAS students receive, I'll give you an example, for this year they receive 5,200 Rand for a book allowance. It's a book or material allowance, but the laptops are 8,400 Rand. And so what we do is we allow students to offset that over 2 years. So instead of getting instead of having to pay 8,400 Rand for this year, you pay half this year and half next year, and it gets deducted off your book allowance. So instead of giving you 5,200 for your books, we'll deduct 4,200 and give you 1,000 Rand for a book allowance, but you also get the laptop. And the nice thing about taking a laptop through the UCT program is that the laptops come fully loaded with all the software that is required for the students. You also have then assistance with all the programs over the period that you are at UCT. So you get all the support that you require all the updates that you can run, which doesn't cost you extra. Whereas if you were going to buy a laptop at a private store, you might have to then buy the software, etc. The specs are checked against what students required, and they are of the right specs. For example, the architecture students get a higher spec laptop because of the AutoCAD that they need to use in their studies. If you are not funded by the financial aid office, but you have a private sponsor, for example, you maybe been awarded a bursary already for university from, say, the Alan Gray Orbis Foundation or one of the other foundations, you can also benefit from this program. You just need to check with your sponsor if they will cover the cost of the laptop, and then it will be billed to your fee account. Okay. So that's our details. We are located in the Kramer Law Building on Middle Campus, level 3. That's our phone number. There's our email address. And if you just go onto the UCT website and look under the DSA page, you will find all the information about financial assistance and financial aid at the university, along with scholarships, etc. So if you have any queries, you can just pop us an email and we'll get back to you. I will move over to the chat now to just see if there's any questions from any people. Okay, there I'm seeing questions now. Does NSFAS consider gross or net income? So NSFAS looks at gross income per annum. So that is gross income for both parents in a family per annum. And obviously the reason they do gross income is to ensure that there's fairness in the system. See the next one. Hi, I have the benefit from UWC who pays 75% of my children's studies at UCT. Will I still qualify for GAP for the remainder 25%? So with the GAP funding, yeah, there is an answer in there. You can only keep the funding that is more than what the GAP funding is offering. This means you cannot have staff receiving GAP funding at the same time. So the GAP funding, if you receive GAP funding and you get other funding from another source, it is pro-rated down. So there will still be a contribution for you to pay. The next one. Are there any cost cuts if your average is above a certain percentage, like Stellenbosch University cutting 40% of tuition fees if your average is above 90%? Faculties do the selection of high-performing students to determine eligibility for faculty scholarships, and they would communicate that to those who qualified for the scholarship. So just to clarify, so it's basically a case of semantics. Different people call it different things. So like Stellenbosch, you're saying cutting 40% of tuition fees if you average above 90%. We provide scholarships for people with high averages. So they'll look at your average and see what that is, and then provide a scholarship, which in essence is almost the same like cutting 40%. And again, it depends on the faculty you're in, because certain faculties will have different scholarship sizes. So like I said, the engineering faculty provides scholarships of 60,000 Rand. And if you're doing first year engineering, 60,000 Rand would be more than 40%. Some of the other faculties, science gives 40,000. I know humanities gives 20,000. Yes. How do you apply for other bursaries besides NSFAS and GAP? So you can check external sponsors that we have. There's a link that was posted there in the chat. Often you can just Google bursaries for a specific study, and you will get some answers. On the UCT webpage, there's also a handbook. It's called Handbook 13. If you just Google Handbook 13, it is a listing of organizations that provide bursaries and funding, and it has all the information about which courses of study they select from, what the criteria is, and all the information about how to apply, etc. Some are online, some have paper applications, etc. So if you can just go onto the UCT website, you will find well, there's either the bursary notice board or Handbook 13. You'll also find that information. Again, are there any forms of funding, for example, funding for academic excellence? Yes, those are called scholarships at UCT, and I've gone through all the scholarships. There are entrance scholarships, as well as the Vice Chancellor scholarships for students where there's academic excellence. Does NSFAS consider a wife with a stepchild to be a distinct family, or do they consider everybody in the same household to be part of the same family? NSFAS considers everybody in the same household to be part of the same family. Yes, that's correct. To get gap funding, must you first apply for NSFAS funding? Yes. To get the gap funding, you must first apply for the NSFAS funding. So we want everybody to be assessed through NSFAS, and then, like I said, once the information about who gets approved and who gets declined come to us, we can then consider gap funding. There's a number of other checks that NSFAS also does. They do checks on whether or not students have studied at other institutions before. So that's why we want everybody to apply via the NSFAS system. See, I'll get back to that one. How is the loan repayable for gap funding? So the loans are repayable once students start working. There's no interest charged on the loan while he's a student. And then it gets payable once he's starts working based on his income that he's earning. Does your financial support at UCT depend on your academic results from high school or your results from university? So like I said, there's both. So your entrance scholarships, those are dependent on your matric results, and then your faculty scholarships, which are for your second, third, and subsequent years, those are dependent on your university results. Do they still look at gross income if you come from a divorced family and the other parent has not been present? Yes, NSFAS takes gross income into account. So what they'll do is they will run a check on the ID numbers of the child based on who the parents are. If that is declined, you have the option to present an appeal to NSFAS and then provide proof, for example, that the parent is not present in the child's life at all, and that will become an appeal with NSFAS. Yes. When does NSFAS funding applications open? So like I said, NSFAS funding applications generally open around September every year, and they close around November. The minister normally makes that announcement, but it's roughly been September to November for the last few years. Is there any way of applying for a bursary using foreign qualification results? It would go much along the same way as when you're applying to UCT with a foreign qualification result. Those results get converted, and then they use, and then in order to be able to assess at what level it is. Correct. Is it difficult to get funding for the Faculty of Medicine? So number one, my advice is always to firstly apply to NSFAS, because they've got the most straightforward criteria, if I can call it that. And then secondly is to try and get other sorts of funding. Again, with medicine, it is a bit difficult in the sense that it's either a health department that will fund. So generally, if you look at students doing medicine or in the health sciences faculty, they're either on NSFAS or on gap funding, or they would be on a bursary from their provincial health department. So they would sign a contract with, let's say they come from the Eastern Cape or from the Northern Cape, they'd sign a contract with the Northern Cape, and you apply directly to the Northern Cape Provincial Health Department, and they would fund you. Other than that, there's not many places that fund medicine specifically, but what you can try and do is try and get funding from other organizations which aren't medical or medicine specific, like for example the Raymond Ackerman Foundation, for example, or something like the Wise Trust, for example. They fund all undergraduate studies, but only a certain amount. It's not often that it's full cost, so they might get 30,000 rand. So you might get 30,000 rand from the Wise Trust and another 30,000 from the Aaron Bear Foundation, and together, you'll get 60. But it is difficult to get full funding for medicine if you don't get a provincial bursary contract from one of the provinces. The provinces are generally the only organizations, if I can call them that fund medicine in terms of full cost, is your health departments. How is the application process of the MasterCard Foundation Scholarship? Yeah, the MasterCard Foundation Scholarship is run by our international office, the IAPO office. I will get their details now and then just post it in this chat, and you can just write to them. There is an application form and the process that you go through there, and I can guide you on that. if I can just put that link, I'll put it in the chat and you can just have a look at it there. So, like I said, just as a closing off before we're almost out of time, the most important thing is to get your documentations together and ready for that application. Most of the problems that students sit with is when they submit an incomplete application at the NSFAS offer or on the NSFAS site, and it can't be processed in one go. So there's either documentation that's missing, or it's not clear, etc., or they forgot to submit something. And what happens is your application goes through the process, so it gets looked at, and if it's incomplete, it gets parked. And they go to the next application. And only when they've gone through this whole queue do they go back to those incomplete applications which are parked. And that's why I say it's very important that you get all your documentation ready so that when you submit one full application so that an immediate decision can be made at the time. So just a quick tip is number one is get all your documentation scanned in as PDFs and then label them. So you say mom ID, dad ID, because that's the way NSFAS is going to ask you to make the application. They're going to say, now upload your mom's ID, next upload your dad's ID, next upload mom's payslip, then your ID, then dad's payslip, etc. So if you have all those documents in a folder labeled correctly, it's going to be easy when you do your upload. A second issue that sometimes arises with an application is the size. So familiarize yourself about how to make a document a smaller size. There's a limit on that size with NSFAS. I can't remember if it's 2 megs, I think. So you can just minimize the size of that document and then it will go through. Try and get your application in as soon as possible. Over the last few years, we've seen the website always having problems on the last day of applications, because at any given point, there'll be a few 100,000 people on that website on the last day, and everybody's trying to push through and then saying, my application is not going in and it's just spinning, etc. Try and get your application in as soon as possible. So keep a watch out for the NSFAS, for the announcement when NSFAS applications will open. Once you've applied to UCT, the day we get information that it is open, we send a notification as well, an email to everybody who's applied to UCT. Every undergraduate student, we will send a notification to say NSFAS applications have opened. We'll provide you with a link and then try and do that application as soon as possible. So I think, yeah, good luck. Submit your applications early, and we hope to see you at UCT in 2023.